The Steve Harringtonism of Stranger Things. The Steve Harringtonism of Stranger Things. Are we Steve pilled yet? Who is Steve pilled? And what does it mean to be Steve pilled? Last week, the official Stranger Things Season 5 trailer dropped, and with it came a lot of buzz online. As expected, the break between seasons was over 3 years, and everyone's gone a little crazy. With the buzz that came with seeing new clips of our favorite characters, and more importantly, insight into what will be going on in Season 5, there came with a burning question from the general audience. Where's Steve? Where is he, guys? This is the burning question that has led a great many of the general audience, aka just casual viewers, to panic. In just a few short days, this subset of Stranger Things audience has created a number of new and questionable theories, all fundamentally revolving around Steve Harrington. But why? From the perspective of a dedicated fan, Steve is far from being as important as the main cast, and his lack of a spotlight in the trailer wasn't a big deal to us. However, it's become very clear over the years of Stranger Things' run that the general audience does seem to think that Steve is a main character, and that he will somehow drive the final season home. I want to be fair to these people. Steve is a character that was intentionally sensationalized and framed in a way that would make him fan favorite. He has some of the funniest and the goofiest lines. He is constantly getting himself into awkward situations, and he provides a lot of comic relief in an otherwise pretty dark show. His character follows a formula that is desirable. He was shallow in the beginning, and he grew out of it. He redeemed himself, and now he is a more selfless character, again, who kind of brings levity to the situation. Also important to mention, Joe Keery is a conventionally attractive guy. Bonus points for that. Now, is Steve a perfect character? No, but he checks a lot of boxes, and his imperfection almost makes him more likable to the general audience. I'm not touching on all the Steve points, okay? In Season 1, Steve is introduced as Nancy's douchey boyfriend / love interest. Right off the bat, he is not really framed as the bad guy, but he isn't a good boyfriend. He is dismissive, he's easily swayed by his friends, and he's too proud to defend Nancy when she needs it. In what I would argue is his lowest point, he gets into a fight with Jonathan in an alleyway and tells him that he always took him for a queer, but thinks he's just a screw-up like his father, and that he's not surprised what happened to Will. At this point in the story, Will is presumed dead. This is after they found the body in the lake, and the whole town assumes that that was Will. After the fight, Nancy and Steve are effectively done for the season. She spends the rest of the season with Jonathan, fighting monsters and uncovering conspiracies. You know, typical Stranger Things stuff. But then surprisingly, Steve does redeem himself at the end. Not a full redemption, I would argue, but he does turn around last minute and go back into the Byers' home to help Nancy and Jonathan continue to fight the Demogorgon. In a surprising twist at the end of the season, Nancy is shown to still be with Steve, despite her moments with Jonathan. However, things seem to be pleasant between the three of them. By Season 2, we see a softer and more caring Steve. He's broken off from his toxic friends, he's trying to be a better partner, and he's trying to help Nancy get through the struggle and the trauma of losing Barb, and the cover-up that has come with that. He's not great at it, but he is trying. Ultimately, it's not good enough for Nancy, and they do break up this season. After Nancy gets drunk at a party and tells Steve that everything is bullshit, Steve is heartbroken and leaves her at the party. This is a gray moment for him because, yes, his heart was broken, but he also did just leave his very, very drunk girlfriend alone at a party with lots of people. Jonathan is there, though, and he does help Nancy get home safely. So, good for Jonathan. After this, they have a little moment. Steve asks Nancy to tell him that she loves him, and she's unable to. So that's their official done moment. Steve doesn't want to let go. He later shows up at the Wheelers' house with flowers to give to Nancy, and Nancy's not there. Dustin's there, because Dustin is trying to find help after his pet Demogorgon ate his cat. And in a twist of fate, the two become reluctant friends. Dustin gets Steve to come help him. This is a big turning point in the show for Steve, because he goes from being just Nancy's boyfriend to actually being his own character in the show. Steve continues to evolve throughout the rest of this season. In a moment that mirrors his fight with Jonathan in season 1, he fights with Billy and gets his ass kicked. He does not win the fight. Max steps in, and then the kids take him while he's unconscious on a little joyride. And when he wakes up, he, of course, doesn't want to be involved in it, but ultimately he does stay for the sake of protecting them, and becomes the reluctant babysitter, which he will now be infamous for forever. After everything is said and done in this season, Nancy does not take him back. At this point, she is officially with Jonathan. Going into season 3, we're shown that Steve is still single, though he's trying to find a new girlfriend. Dustin is still his best friend, and the two of them continue to have a lot of heartwarming banter. Steve has taken a summer job at Scoops Ahoy and has a new friend, Robin, who is framed as a potential love interest at the beginning of the season. Robin, unlike Nancy, is very alternative and doesn't try to conform. Steve initially voices disinterest in her, even calling her weird and hyper. However, throughout the season, we see that Steve and Robin become closer and closer and forge a very playful bond, as the two of them, plus Dustin and Erica, are trying to crack the Russian code and get themselves into all kinds of trouble. In a really tender moment between the two of them, they're in a bathroom stall, and Steve essentially confesses his love to Robin, or wouldn't say love, his interest in Robin, and she kind of breaks, and this is the moment that she tells him that while she has been fascinated by him, it's not because she's romantically interested in him, because she's gay. This is a moment where Steve again proves himself to be a good character and a good guy, because he is disappointed that Robin doesn't feel the same, and he is confused at first, but ultimately he continues to treat her the same. He doesn't seem grossed out or weird about the situation. They continue to be best friends, and I would say that this piece of information kind of bonds them even closer together. And from there on, Steve and Robin are officially a little duo. Season 3 is arguably the most Steve-centric season up until this point, and it's where a lot of casual viewers latched onto the character. From a consumer standpoint, this season was extremely successful. The marketing, off the charts. Personally, I loved watching Steve and Robin grow together. They're super cute. I love Robin. Season 4 Steve is a lot more of the same. I would argue that Steve doesn't really grow much as a character in this season, because most of his redemption arc is already completed. He is still the babysitter, and he is even a little bit more reluctant about it in this season. I would say the only thing that really stands out in this season is that he and Dustin aren't quite as close as they used to be. They're still best friends, but I think because of the addition of Eddie, there's some jealousy going on, and Steve also has a little bit of a, like, enemies to friends moment with Eddie, which will lead me into my next point here in just a minute. Steve spends more time with Nancy this season than any other season. He apologizes to her for being a bad boyfriend in the past and remains hopeful that she might see him in that way again and take him back. However, when Jonathan arrives at Hawkins in the season finale, Steve seems to respect that relationship and distances himself. We don't see any more Steve and Nancy interactions for the rest of the episode, but this does mean that that love triangle is left open because Nancy and Jonathan still have some stuff going on. They're still not being honest with each other. Aside from his feelings for Nancy, Steve doesn't really have any specific character goals that are going into the next season. So this leaves us in a place of maybe some wondering of what Steve's deal is going to be. Although at this point, I think it's pretty clear that, again, he's going to go back to being more of a side character, while the focus is moved back on to our main cast of characters. Will, Mike, Dustin, Lucas, Elle, and he's going to kind of fall into the background as a supportive character. That's my guess. A vast majority of the general audience have theorized that Steve will die in season 5. The hows and the whys are varied from reasonable to completely outrageous, but the fear of his demise is consistent. I think it's reasonable to suggest that Steve will die in season 5, as the Duffers have already stated that most characters will be at risk this season. Of course, we would still have to take into account the love triangle and how that ends up being resolved. If Steve dies, Nancy will likely end up with Jonathan, and that'll be that. But if he survives, things are a little bit more complicated there, because there is still a possibility of him ending up with Nancy. I hope that we see this resolved somewhat early on, or at least that this isn't a huge piece of Steve's plot for the season, because it's worn out at this point. We've seen the Steve, Nancy, Jonathan stuff evolve. I think it would be great if we just went back to Nancy and Jonathan are a pair, they work their shit out. Steve is back to the back seat, besties with Robin. He doesn't need a love interest to be a good character. That's not a part of his growth out of being douchebag Steve was moving on from being just a boyfriend and onto being his own person. So while I think it would be nice to see Steve get what he wants, he has had a chance, and I don't think that it's necessary for the storyline to focus on that. The public's fascination with Steve Harrington, like I said, has led to some very odd theories and an insane amount of mischaracterization, which leads me to my next point. Steve in fanon. One thing that I see from people who are not chronically online is the lack of understanding about the difference between fanon and mischaracterization. Contrary to the now popular belief, not every piece of a character's identity needs to be shown on screen for it to fit with the character's personality and their values. What I mean by this, for example, is that even though Steve has canonically only shown interest in women, fans could write about him being a closeted bisexual with interest in a man without it completely going beyond who he is as a person. Whereas writing him to suddenly be 100% gay and out and proud would be out of character. That would be mischaracterization. And disclaimer, I'm not saying that we can't write about Steve being an out and proud gay man, but there's a lot more that goes into it. It wouldn't be a sudden switch because that is out of character. versus writing in that maybe he's repressing something would be an easier leap. Does that make sense? Steve has been shipped with a lot of characters. The most popular are him with Eddie and him with Billy. They surpassed a lot of other pairings on AO3 very quickly. And I think the Steve, Eddie, or Steady, and Steve, Billy, Herringrove pairings are a really great example of fanon versus mischaracterization, because we did actually see friendship blossom between Steve and Eddie and a little bit of on-screen tension that you could interpret as being like romantic or sexual tension. And I don't think that one is as out of character and as much of a leap. I enjoy the pairing. I'm not a huge fan of it, but I can see how people got there. Meanwhile, Herringrove is a pairing that, yes, there is some tension on screen because they hate each other and they want to hurt each other, and Billy is evil and, again, wants to hurt people. I think for there to be an actual like romantic pairing between them, you have to mischaracterize them, or you have to put in, again, a whole nother story, and there's a lot of building. You can't just jump into it from what we have. So there is that as an example. Hey gang, I'm editing. I called Billy evil. I want to retract that. I don't think he's evil. I just think he sucks and I don't like him. He's not evil in the way that like the Demogorgon or Vecna are evil. He's just a really shitty guy. I think most people are willing to accept that certain things are more fanon and move on. This does, however, require some media literacy and understanding of what good writing looks like, which is something that there's been a lot of discourse online about, is what does good writing look like? And just as a side note, I saw a lot of people saying, isn't it weird that a lot of bylers suddenly all have degrees in creative writing? Let's think about that for a second. No matter how much you want him to be, Steve is not an outcast. I've seen a lot of discourse about this too. Just because your friends are outcasts doesn't make you an outcast. Sure, he abandoned popularity in lieu of staying loyal to his true friends, and that certainly came with some negative social points. And yes, he has experienced trauma. He's been through a lot. I'm not going to take that away from him. But Steve is not a minority or a freak in the way that our other main characters are framed. He is still a white, straight, good-looking, upper middle class guy in the 80s. His friend associations don't change that. Steve was made to be a side character. Over the seasons, he made a more prominent role for himself, but his importance can't be written off. And he ultimately truly does exist to be supportive, a supportive role. Some people truly seem to believe that this will change in season 5 and that he'll carry the story somehow. They're genuinely upset that he was not seen more in the trailer, thus, where's Steve? I've seen a lot of TikTok comments and a lot of YouTube comments. Guys, where is Steve? Hey, is anyone else worried about Steve? I'm not going to watch the show if Steve's not there. On to the byler divide. One thing that I've noticed during my time in the fandom, particularly on the byler side of things, is the general sense of dislike for Steve. He's not a favorite on this side of the internet, and he is definitely seen as more of a nuisance in general. Most bylers prefer Jancy over Stancy and are more than okay with Steve ending the series without being part of a couple. I frequently see people on Twitter saying that they really don't care if Steve dies. Some even go as far as to say that they hope he dies and that they just hate him. So there's extremes on both sides. I don't think that most bylers actually truly hate Steve. I think that they hate what he has come to symbolize in the fandom, which is ignorance, arrogance, and dismissal of other characters. I can guarantee you right now that if I asked any of my extended family anything about Stranger Things, or just to name a Stranger Things character, the first one they would think of is Steve. The amount of times that I've had people who have watched entire episodes ask me, what's his name? When referring to any other character is astounding. So yeah, Steve tends to frustrate us, not because of who he is, but for the people who now associate with him, which is a bummer, because I think Steve is cool. Steve is a great example of a character that had a lot of potential. He went from, again, being a bully to being a hero, and isn't that a good thing? But instead of focusing on the people who have been there to make Steve better, the focus is on all Steve himself. He gets all of the credit, and our outcasts continue to get pushed to the side. The complete opposite of the show's message, by the way. I actually really like Steve. I think that he is a really funny character. He's a really sweet and endearing character. He's not in my top 5, but I will be very sad if he dies. I'm at a point now where I don't really think he is going to die, just because I don't think it would further the plot at all. But it would be really sad just to see the impact that that has on our other characters, especially Dustin and Robin. Dustin, for the most part, because he just lost Eddie last season, and he's taking that very hard. He's just a kid, and doing that to him seems unnecessarily cruel, even for this show. One thing, however, that I can be certain of, if Steve does die, the general audience will be shaken pretty badly. There will be some outrage, and hopefully that outrage will detract from the byler outrage that I suspect we will see. In conclusion, whether we like it or not, the name Steve Harrington has become inextricably tied to the name of Stranger Things in the public. There's no escaping it, at least not until New Year's. This holiday season, with the release dates lining up with major holidays, I'm sure we'll get our fill of annoying comments from family and friends. I personally am going to make a drinking game out of it, and I will be very drunk by the end of all of my social gatherings, but it'll make it better. So what do you guys think? Do you think Steve will die? Do you think that something else will happen to him? I want to hear your unique theories on whatever you want/think will happen with Steve. And if it's ridiculous, put it down in the comments, because that shit makes me laugh. Couple side notes after recording this. I am filming this on November 5th, 2025, and it has been 5 years since the Destiel confession. So I am not wearing my Supernatural shirt because it's in the wash right now, but I am still wearing my Supernatural tattoo, and it will be with me forever, so I can think about that right now. Happy Destiel Day, guys. We've made it through so much. 5 years of the Destiel meme breaking all of the world's horrid news to us. Aside from today being Destiel Day, tomorrow is Stranger Things Day, and that is huge. This is going to be a really big Stranger Things Day, because the first 5 minutes of Season 5, Episode 1 are going to be put out, and I already can see the internet exploding. It's going to be a really great time. I'm so excited. And we are down to 20 days until the release. I guess if you're counting today, 21 days. But we're almost there, guys. It's been a long, insane journey. Long 3 years. I want to say thank you for watching. Thank you for tuning in. Again, I'm Jay. You can find me on Twitter at StanleyUrine for more of my probably should stay inside thoughts. Much love, and happy holidays, and happy Stranger Things Day. I hope that you guys all have a really great time tomorrow, and I will see you on the other side. Bye.